Gravity is a cruel accountant. It tallies every ounce of fat, every weary bone, and hands you the bill. Out here, most species snap like dry twigs under the weight of a heavy stare. They never learned what it takes to stand up on a planet that actively hates you. Part 1. The weight of fatigue. Sweat smells different when it's recycled through life support 3,000 times. It takes on a metallic stale tang, like chewing on copper wire. Connor Davies sat at the scarred polymer counter of Sector 4's cantina, nursing a synthetic bourbon that tasted like iodine. He was 34, but his spine felt 60. Working the deep space shipping lanes did that to a man. Your knees ached in 0G, and your head throbbed when the artificial gravity calibrators misfired. Right now, the station was holding a comfortable 0.4 standard Gs. It was the galactic sweet spot. Light enough for the fragile avian species to flutter their vestigial wings, light enough for the elongated, brittle-bone locals to walk without shattering their femurs. For Connor, it just felt annoying, like walking through a swimming pool. He never quite got traction. He rotated his right shoulder. A dull pop resonated at the base of his neck. "You humans are always leaking," a voice rumbled. Connor didn't look up. He recognized the wet, gravelly base. It belonged to Garth. Garth was a crotalon, a species that looked like someone had crossbred a snapping turtle with a silverback gorilla and given it a severe anger management problem. He stood 7 feet tall, weighed roughly 400 pounds, and was covered in overlapping dermal plates the colour of bruised eggplant. Crotalons were the enforcers of this sector. They hailed from a planet with a gravity of 1.2 standard Gs. In a galaxy where most sentient life evolved on lush, low-mass moons, Garth was a walking bulldozer, and he knew it. Garth slammed a thick 4-fingered hand onto the counter. The polymer cracked. Connor's bourbon shivered in its glass, a tiny ripple forming in the amber liquid. "I said," Garth leaned in, his breath reeking of fermented fungus and raw meat. "You leak, sweat, oils disgusting. You leave a trail of moisture wherever you walk." Connor stared at his glass. He didn't want to fight. He just wanted to shower, maybe 4 hours of uninterrupted sleep, and for his lower back to stop throbbing. "It's called thermoregulation, Garth. Keeps us from overheating." "It's a sign of a weak biology," Garth sneered. He shoved Connor's shoulder. It wasn't a punch, just a casual displacement of mass, but given Garth's size, it was enough to slide Connor's stool back a few inches. Soft skin, no plates, no claws, just water and fragile bones. "I don't know why the dockmaster hires Terrans for heavy lifting. I can outlift 3 of you." "Congratulations," Connor said flatly. He pulled his stool forward again. "Want a medal? I think they sell plastic ones down at the promenade." The cantina went dead quiet. The low hum of the ventilation system suddenly sounded like a jet engine. A few tables over, Abigail Foster winced. She was a fellow Terran, a structural engineer with grease permanently etched into her cuticles. She caught Connor's eye and gave a subtle, frantic shake of her head. "Don't do it." Garth's small, deep-set yellow eyes narrowed. His dermal plates shifted, a dry clicking sound like stones grinding together. "You mock me, soft skin." "I'm not mocking you. I'm tired." Connor took a slow sip of the iodine bourbon. It burned going down, but not in a good way. "I just worked a 14-hour shift pulling tungsten crates out of a freighter with a busted inertial dampener. Leave me alone." Garth laughed. Sounded like an engine trying to turn over in the cold. "Tungsten? Heavy for a little Terran. You complain about gravity. You complain about the weight." The alien stepped closer, his sheer bulk blocking the dim neon lights of the bar. "You think you know heavy? You humans evolved on a dirt ball. You use machines for everything because your bodies are pathetic." Connor sighed. He placed his glass down. He looked at his own hands. They were calloused, scarred from pinched gears, knuckles swollen from microfractures. He thought about Earth. He thought about the relentless crushing pull of 9.8 meters per second squared. He thought about how human infants literally have to spend months building enough muscle, just to lift their massive, oversized heads off the floor. The universe didn't know what heavy was. "Garth," Connor said, his voice stripped of all emotion. "Walk away." "Or what?" The alien slammed his hand down again, this time directly on Connor's glass. It shattered. The iodine bourbon splashed across the counter, soaking into the sleeves of Connor's faded utility jacket. Connor closed his eyes. The smell of the spilled alcohol was sharp. He could feel the cold liquid seeping through the cheap fabric against his forearm. A familiar ugly knot tightened in his stomach. It wasn't heroic anger. It was deep, bitter exhaustion crystallizing into spite. "You ruined my drink," Connor said quietly. "I'll buy you a new one," Garth mocked, "after I break your legs, unless you want to prove your strength. The calibration pit. Tonight. You and me. The calibration pit." It was a localized gravity chamber used for stress testing starship hull plating. The dock workers used it for illegal betting. You stand in the center, the operator dials up the artificial gravity, and the last one standing takes the pot. It was stupid, barbaric, and extremely bad for the joints. Abigail stood up from her table. "Hey, come on, Garth. He's not doing that. Nobody wants to get their retinas detached tonight." Garth ignored her, keeping his yellow eyes locked on Connor. "Terran coward." Connor slowly wiped the spilled booze off his arm with a napkin. He looked at the shattered glass. He thought about his aching back, his tired knees, and the sheer, unending irritation of living in a galaxy full of papier-mâché aliens who thought 1.2 Gs made them a god. "Fine," Connor said. He stood up. He was a full foot shorter than Garth, but he didn't puff out his chest. He just looked up, tired and hollow. "Let's go." Part 2. The calibration pit. The lower levels of Sector 4 smelled of ozone and hot dust. The calibration pit sat in the center of a cavernous cargo bay. It was a circular platform of reinforced steel, 20 feet across, surrounded by thick plexiglass walls. Massive induction coils hummed beneath the floor grating, generating an oppressive localized gravitational field. A crowd had already gathered. News travelled fast on a station starved for entertainment. There were spindly Virillians with their translucent skin, chittering insectoid mechanics from the deep decks, and a handful of heavily muscled Crotolans there to support Garth. The betting terminal was a frantic flurry of digital credits. The odds were overwhelmingly against Connor, 70-1. Abigail cornered him before he could step onto the platform. "Are you out of your mind?" she hissed, grabbing his arm. Her grip was tight, her nails digging into his jacket. "Connor, look at him. He's built like a tank. His homeworld is practically a centrifuge." "I know," Connor said, rolling his shoulders again. He was trying to loosen the tight muscles in his neck. "You're going to pop an aneurysm," Abigail said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The pit operator is taking bets. He's not going to stop the machine until someone's organs liquefy. You want to die over a spilled drink?" "It wasn't a very good drink," Connor admitted. He looked at Abigail. "Abby, do you have any credits on you?" "What?" "Bet on me." She stared at him, searching his face for a punchline. Finding none, she scoffed. "You're an idiot, a suicidal idiot." But she pulled out her datapad anyway. Connor stepped through the heavy security door and onto the platform. The metal was cold beneath his boots. Garth was already there, doing some kind of aggressive stretching routine, his heavy dermal plates clacking loudly. He slammed his fists together, hyping up the crowd of Crotolans pressing against the glass. The pit operator, a greasy-haired human named Miller, leaned over the control console. His voice crackled through the intercom. "All right, rules are simple. No leaving your designated square. I crank the G-dial every 60 seconds. First one to hit the floor, tap out, or lose consciousness loses. We start at station standard 0.4 Gs. Connor stood in his square. He didn't stretch. He just let his arms hang loosely by his sides, taking slow, deep breaths. He focused on his center of gravity. "Commencing," Miller announced. A low thrum resonated through the soles of Connor's boots. The air in the chamber seemed to thicken slightly, though it was just the psychological anticipation of weight. "Bumping to 1.0 standard Gs," Miller said lazily. The hum deepened, the gravity field engaged. Instantly, a collective gasp echoed from the alien spectators outside the glass. For them, 1.0 G was a crushing nightmare. It was the kind of gravity that tore ligaments and ruptured spleens. Inside the pit, Garth grunted. His thick legs bent slightly and he widened his stance to brace against the sudden, invisible weight pressing down on his shoulders. He looked across the pit, a nasty grin spreading across his reptilian snout, fully expecting to see the human crumpled in a heap of broken bones. Connor was just standing there. In fact, Connor looked better than he had in the cantina. At 0.4 Gs, human muscles degrade. The body overcompensates. Every movement is a miscalculation. But at 1.0 G, at exactly 9.8 meters per second squared, Connor sighed. A long, genuine sound of relief. His spine aligned. His joints, which had been complaining all day from the lack of resistance, suddenly slid into their proper grooves. The dull headache at the base of his skull vanished as his cardiovascular system finally had the exact amount of resistance it evolved to fight against. He wasn't heavy. He was home. Garth's grin faltered. The human hadn't even buckled. "You hide the pain well," Garth growled, his voice a little tighter than before. "What pain?" Connor asked. He reached up and scratched his nose. Outside, the crowd went dead silent. The insectoid mechanics clicked their mandibles in confusion. Abigail was leaning against the glass, a slow, predatory smile creeping onto her face. "Taking it to 1.5, Miller's voice crackled. The hum turned into a vibration that rattled the teeth. Garth let out a harsh breath. This was his homeworld's gravity. The Crotalon settled into it comfortably. His massive muscles bulged, adapting perfectly. He thumped his chest. "This is real gravity, Terran. This is where strength is forged." Connor felt the pull. It was a sudden, heavy blanket thrown over his shoulders. His clothes felt leaden. The blood rushed toward his legs, and his heart immediately kicked into a higher gear to pump it back up to his brain. He felt his cheek sag a fraction of an inch. It was heavy. It was uncomfortable. It felt like carrying a 60-pound rucksack on a long hike. Connor widened his stance by 2 inches. He locked his core, the dense, fibrous muscles of a Terran abdomen clenching instinctively to support his spine. Humans weren't built with armored plates. They were built for endurance. They were built to chase down prey for miles under a scorching sun until the prey simply collapsed from exhaustion. "A bit stuffy in here," Connor muttered. He unzipped his jacket, the fabric moving sluggishly. Garth stared. The human should be dead. His femur should have snapped. His heart should have exploded. Yet the small, pink, fleshy creature was just standing there, complaining about the temperature. "Impossible," Garth hissed, a milky, viscous fluid beginning to bead on his forehead. Crotalon sweat. "You don't read much, do you, Garth?" Connor asked, his voice strained but steady. He was breathing heavier now, drawing in air from the bottom of his diaphragm. "You think you're tough because you're big." "Taking it to 2.0 Gs, Miller announced over the intercom. There was a tremor of disbelief in the operator's voice. The machine whined, a high-pitched mechanical shriek. The air compressed. The floor seemed to grab Connor's boots with magnetic force. Garth roared. The alien dropped to one knee, the sheer, crushing force of twice his standard gravity slamming into him like a falling girder. His massive claws gouged deep tracks into the reinforced steel plating as he tried to keep himself upright. The heavy dermal plates on his back groaned, grinding against each other. He was panting, his lungs struggling to expand against the invisible vice gripping his chest. Connor was still standing. His knees were bent, his posture hunched, but he was on his feet. The veins in his neck popped, thick and blue against his skin. Every heartbeat roared in his ears, a frantic, desperate rhythm. 2.0 Gs was brutal. Fighter pilots back on Earth trained for this, pulled 9 Gs in high-speed maneuvers, but sustained G-force was different. It dragged at your organs. It made your own ribs feel like iron bars crushing your lungs. Sweat poured down Connor's face, stinging his eyes. He didn't wipe it away. He couldn't spare the energy to lift his arm. He looked down at the massive alien currently struggling to breathe on the floor. The internal contradiction was loud in his head. You could tap out. You made your point. Your knees are screaming, just tap out. But then he looked at the sheer terror in Garth's yellow eyes. You know, Connor forced the words out through gritted teeth, his voice a harsh rasp. Earth is categorized as a Class 9 Deathworld. Garth let out a pathetic gurgling wheeze. We don't have armor, Connor continued, sweat dripping from his chin and splashing onto the deck plates, because the gravity is so heavy, it would trap us. Operator, Garth choked out, his arms trembling violently as he tried to push himself up. Stop! What's that? Connor asked loudly, pretending he couldn't hear over the roar of the induction coils. You want to go higher? Outside the glass, Abigail was laughing. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was the jagged, vindictive sound of someone who had spent her whole life being underestimated by the rest of the galaxy. Dial it to 2.5, Miller, Connor yelled, his legs trembling. He felt a muscle in his thigh cramp violently, a sharp, stabbing pain, but he bit his tongue until he tasted copper, refusing to fall. You're crazy, Davies, Miller yelled back. Do it. Pressure behaves like a living entity when dialed up this high. It stops being an invisible force and becomes a physical ceiling, pressing down with calculated malice. Miller's hand hesitated over the control console, his pale face reflected in the plexiglass, eyes darting between the battered human and the flattened crotalin. Davies, I'm not authorized for this, Miller shouted over the intercom, the audio distorting with static. Station limits require medical waivers for anything past 2.2. Do it, Connor gasped. Every syllable tasted like old pennies. His jaw muscles locked. His legs shook with violent, uncontrolled tremors. Miller slammed the dial forward. The induction coils screamed. A deafening mechanical shriek tore through the cargo bay. The floor grating buckled slightly under the intense magnetic strain. Gravity hit 2.5 standard. Garth stopped roaring. The sound cut off instantly, replaced by a wet, sickening crack. One of the massive dermal plates on his broad back split under the sheer weight of his own amplified mass. At 2.5 Gs, Garth's 400-pound frame suddenly weighed a literal ton. He was plastered against the reinforced steel, his snout pressed flat. Milky sweat pooled around his face in a thick puddle. His yellow eyes rolled back. He wasn't just struggling to stand anymore. He was struggling to keep his internal organs from rupturing. Connor didn't look much better. His vision tunneled, the edges of the brightly lit bay turning a hazy, static-filled grey. His heart hammered violently against his ribs, a frantic, desperate bird trapped in a cage. Thump, 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 thump. The sound drowned out the whining coils. He bent his knees further, dropping his centre of gravity. His utility jacket felt like a lead apron. It took immense conscious effort just to draw a breath. He had to force his diaphragm down, fight the crushing weight pressing on his chest, pull the stale, ozone-tinged air into his lungs, and then manually push it back out. This is stupid, Connor thought. A bitter, cynical laugh echoing in his oxygen-starved brain. I am literally shortening my lifespan because a giant turtle spilled my bad whiskey. But that was the human condition, wasn't it? Spite. Pure, unadulterated defiance. Evolution taught Terrans to chase mammoths into exhaustion, to cross frozen tundras with nothing but animal pelts, to look at a hostile, indifferent universe and say, no, you move. Garth's massive four-fingered hand twitched. He tried to tap the deck. He couldn't even lift his arm. His thick fingers just spasmed against the steel. Miller! Garth choked, the sound barely escaping his crushed larynx. Tap! Tap out! Miller's hand slammed the emergency release. The mechanical shriek died. The induction coils powered down with a heavy, vibrating hum. The sudden absence of weight hit Connor worse than the pressure. His cardiovascular system was still pumping for 2.5 Gs. Without the crushing resistance, his vascular pressure spiked violently. A wave of intense nausea rolled over his stomach. He stumbled forward, his knees instantly turning to jelly, and caught himself against the plexiglass wall. The cold, hard surface felt amazing against his feverish forehead. He dry heaved once, a painful spasm that rattled his ribs. Behind him, Garth didn't move. The giant alien lay pinned to the floor by his own exhaustion, taking shallow, desperate gulps of air. Medical droids were already buzzing toward the pit, their optical sensors flashing urgent amber. Connor pushed himself off the glass. His legs felt weightless, absurdly light, like he was walking on the moon. Every step was a clumsy, uncoordinated effort. He keyed the security door open and stepped out of the calibration pit. Nobody cheered. There was no applause, no slow clap, no heroic music swelling in the background. Just a deep, uncomfortable silence. The insectoid mechanics had backed away, their mandibles tucked tight against their thoraxes in a universal display of intimidation. The spindly Virillians stared at him with wide, unblinking black eyes. Even the other Crotolans, Garth's crew, parted like water, giving him a wide berth. They weren't looking at a victor. They were looking at a monster. They were looking at a creature that came from a world so hostile, so heavy, that merely surviving it made him practically indestructible in their eyes. Connor hated that look. It was isolating. It reminded him exactly how far away Earth really was. Abigail stepped out from the crowd. She didn't look terrified. She looked rich. She held up her data pad, the screen glowing with a ridiculous string of digital credits. 70-1 odds, Davies, she said, her voice trying to sound casual, though a slight tremor gave away her adrenaline. I just made enough to buy a surplus freighter. Connor wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. His knuckles were bruised, the skin pale and clammy. Buy me a drink first. A real one. Not that synthetic engine coolant from Sector 4. Top shelf, Abigail agreed, looping one of his heavy arms over her shoulder to keep him upright. Come on, let's get you to medbay. You look like a corpse. Part 4. The bill comes due. The medbay smelled of antiseptic and ozone. It was a sterile, unforgiving scent that stripped away whatever dignity you had left. Connor sat on a biobed, his legs dangling over the edge, waiting for the diagnostic scanner to finish its aggravating beep. His entire body was a grid of dull, throbbing aches. His lower spine felt like it had been compressed in a hydraulic press, and every time he blinked, a phantom headache spiked behind his eyes. Abigail sat in the corner, tapping furiously on her datapad, transferring her newly acquired wealth into off-station accounts before the local syndicates got wise. You tore 3 micro-ligaments in your left knee, the medical droid hummed, its synthetic voice grating and monotonous. Slight cardiac strain, elevated cortisol levels, suggest 72 hours of absolute rest. Put it on my tab, Connor grunted, rubbing his temples. I cannot do that, the droid replied. Your tab is currently overdrawn by 40 credits. Abigail didn't look up from her screen. She casually tossed a physical credit chip onto the metal tray beside the droid. It clattered loudly. Take it out of that, and give him some muscle relaxants. The good ones, not the stuff you give the avians. The droid hummed, snatched the chip and dispensed a small foil packet. Connor dry swallowed the pills immediately. You're an idiot, you know, Abigail said softly, finally looking up. The harsh fluorescent lights cast long shadows under her eyes. She looked tired, too. They all looked tired. You proved your point, but you could have blown a gasket. What were you trying to prove? Connor stared at his boots. They were scuffed. The reinforced toes dented from kicking heavy cargo crates, all cycle. I wasn't trying to prove anything. Bull. Connor sighed, his shoulders slumped. I got tired of apologizing for being human, you know? We come out here to the edge of the galaxy, and they treat us like fragile glass because we don't have scales or claws or chitin, but they don't get it. They don't know what it's like to fight your own planet just to stand up. He leaned back against the stiff pillows of the biobed. Garth thinks he's tough because he can lift a tungsten crate. I wanted him to feel what it's like when the universe decides you shouldn't exist. Abigail offered a slow, cynical smile. Well, you definitely did that. I hear he's in the intensive care ward down on level 2. Fractured plate. It's going to take weeks to regrow. The whole station is terrified of you now. They think Terrans are some kind of suppressed bioweapons. Great, Connor muttered, closing his eyes. Just what I need. More aliens giving me a wide berth at the cantina. Hey, she said, her tone softening. At least you get the whole bar to yourself. The doors to the medbay slid open with a soft hiss. Miller walked in. The pit operator looked incredibly out of place among the sterile white walls, his greasy hair plastered to his forehead, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He shuffled nervously, refusing to make eye contact with Abigail. Davies, Miller said, his voice barely a croak. Connor didn't open his eyes. What do you want, Miller? Come to collect a fee? No, Miller quickly said, holding up a hand. No fee, The dockmaster heard about what happened. Garth is out of commission for a month. We need someone to pull the heavy shifts on the orbital loading dock. Connor opened one eye. The orbital docks were 0G. No heavy lifting, just guiding massive containers with localized thrusters. It was a cushy job, usually reserved for the avians or the senior union guys. And? Connor asked. And, Miller swallowed hard. The dockmaster said if you can survive 2.5 Gs without popping, you can probably handle the thruster kickback. Job's yours if you want it. Double pay. Abigail let out a low whistle. Double pay, we might actually be able to afford real meat this month. Connor considered it. His back throbbed. His knee felt like it was full of hot sand. But the thought of floating in 0G, letting his compressed spine finally decompress in the silent, weightless void of space. It sounded like heaven. He sat up slowly, wincing as the muscles in his core protested. Tell the dockmaster I'll take it, Connor said, but I need 3 days off. Doctor's orders. Miller nodded vigorously. Yeah, absolutely. 3 days, take 4. Just don't crush anybody else in the meantime. The operator practically ran out of the room, the doors hissing shut behind him. Connor looked at Abigail. The cynical, bitter exhaustion was still there, heavy in his bones, but for the first time in a long time the weight didn't feel entirely unbearable. Come on, Connor grunted, sliding off the biobed. His left leg buckled slightly, but he caught himself. You promised me top-shelf whiskey. I said top shelf, Abigail corrected, standing up and sliding her datapad into her grease-stained jacket. I didn't say it would taste good. They walked out of the medbay together, 2 humans far from home, carrying the invisible weight of Earth in their bones. The corridor was empty, save for a few maintenance bots buffing the floors. Connor limped slightly, his breath hitching every time his bad knee took his weight. He wasn't a superhero. He wasn't a conqueror. He was just a guy who knew how to carry a heavy load. And in a galaxy full of soft worlds, that was dangerous enough. If you enjoyed this gritty, grounded dive into human endurance and the harsh realities of high-gravity evolution, punch that like button like a 2.5G calibration test. Drop a comment below telling us what alien species you'd challenge to a heavy lifting contest. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow Terrans, and subscribe to the channel for more dark, cynical, and purely HFY sci-fi stories delivered right to your feed. Stay heavy, humans. Main characters, Connor Davies, Abigail Foster, Miller Hayes.